Welcome back to Bitcoin Treasuries. I'm Tim Kotzman. I'm here with Eric Semler, the founder and president of TCS Capital and the chairman of Semler Scientific, and also Renae Cormier, the chief financial officer of Semler Scientific. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Eric, on your X profile, it says, "Make every day a masterpiece," and it's attributed to Bill Walton. Could you tell us what the inspiration is behind that?
Well, I've always been a huge Bill Walton fan. When I was 12 years old, the Portland Trail Blazers won the NBA championship for the first and only time. And Bill Walton was our leader, and I always just admired his wisdom and obviously his skill as a basketball player. And about, I'd say, a year and a half ago, shortly before he died, I just by coincidence had a chance to have lunch with him, one-on-one with my wife and my son, and it was just like a cosmic spiritual epiphany for me, that just understanding who he was as a person and just the incredible engagement that he was able to connect with people. His ability to connect with people just blew me away, and so much to talk about. Most of it wasn't about basketball, and I just became kind of like even more in love with Bill Walton, the person. And, he died shortly after that, which was very sad. But one of the things he said in our lunch was, "Make every day a masterpiece," and just stuck with me. And it was like really just such a powerful comment to live by, every day of my life. And so I think about that a lot and really miss him.
The first thing that you see on the Semler website is transforming healthcare for a brighter future. Could one or each of you unpack what that means to you, what you've accomplished so far, and what you're focusing on accomplishing this year?
Mm-hmm. Sure. I'm going to let Renae comment on that more. But first, I'd just like to credit my father, Herbert Semler, who's a cardiologist in Portland, Oregon. For decades, he was developing devices to help prevent cardiovascular diseases. He was also just taking care of patients on a daily basis. And he came up with this idea of a device to screen people for peripheral artery disease. It's called QuantaFlo, and it's one of many devices that he invented over his lifetime. He's 96 years old. He's going to be 97 this year. He's no longer involved with the company, but he's watching closely, and just think that it's his vision. He always went by this motto of creating tools for medicine to help mankind. And so we're just kind of, playing out his vision of helping people and preventing people from having cardiovascular diseases and other vascular diseases. And that's kind of what we're about. And Renae, you can talk maybe more specifically about QuantaFlo.
Sure. Yeah. I'll just add to that on the QuantaFlo side. And when you ask of transforming healthcare for a brighter future, I really think of QuantaFlo as a paradigm shift, because right now for peripheral arterial disease, there's not routine testing for it. And our test is routinely done in doctor's offices or by home health care aides that come for annual exams for typically patients in the Medicare age group. And by finding the disease early, doctors are able to put preventative care in place and help prevent future large adverse incidents like heart attack or stroke in these patients by catching it early. And to add on to your question of, what we're excited about the future as well, not only expanding PED testing, but for QuantaFlo extensions, we are out seeking FDA 510K clearance for a product extension for other cardiovascular diseases. So that's also very exciting, where we can start to test early, diagnose early, and put preventative measures in place.
Renae, could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your professional career, and both your personal and professional journey of discovering Bitcoin? We've heard a lot from Eric, so I'm going to give you a few questions.
Sure. So I actually started my career as an auditor at PricewaterhouseCoopers in public accounting. And that was actually back in Colorado. I grew up in Colorado, moved to New York and joined their mergers and acquisitions team. where I met my husband and had to eventually, one of us had to leave, and I found a job first and leaped then into the hedge fund industry. Worked for the Ziff family, which was a great firm to work for. Took a few years off to take care of my young kids, and then joined another startup hedge fund from my boss that was at Ziff. So worked there. That fund closed in 2022. At the time of closing, we were actually one of Semler's largest shareholders. And that's where I got to know our CEO, Doug Murphy-Chichorian, over a several-year time period. And so when I called him and let him know that the fund was closing and why we weren't going to be shareholders anymore, he's like, well, I might have an opportunity for you. So that's when I joined Semler. I started out in their investor relations and business development team looking for other products or acquisitions, and then became CFO last year in July. And here we are. In May, obviously, we announced that we were going into this Bitcoin Treasury strategy. Being a fundamental investor, we had tried to look at Bitcoin and never got over from a fundamentals, investment bottoms up, getting over the hurdle of investing it when I was at the hedge fund. And so my introduction to it was more on a personal level, just investing it on a small scale on my own, using apps or whatever. And then when Eric came to the board and the management team earlier this year, he provided us with a lot of information, did a lot of research, had a lot of thoughtful back and forth with the board and with Eric, and just with educating us. Michael Saylor was also instrumental. I think obviously his website has so much information, and from day one when they did it, and so we were able to come up the curve pretty quickly here on the Bitcoin side. And at the time when we did this, Semler had around $60 million in cash on the balance sheet. Again, we were looking for M&A. We were investing in treasury securities, which you could argue was actually destroying value based on the inflation and taxes of it, right? And so to me, it wasn't a huge leap, and it really made a lot of sense to adopt it as our treasury strategy.
Hey guys, this episode is brought to you by OnRamp. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risks and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated, cold storage, multi-sig vault, guarded by 3 independent, institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. To learn more, schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team. Go to www.onrampbitcoin.com. And Eric, how about you? Do you want to touch on your upbringing and professional career and your journey to Bitcoin, which I understand wasn't necessarily one moment in time, but maybe a couple different things?
Sure. Yeah. So it kind of ties back to Bill Walton. I grew up in Portland, got the Blazers. I'm a huge sports fan, and I just, really kind of take a lot of pride in being an Oregonian, and being different, and kind of marching to my own beat. And that's always kind of driven me. When I went to college at Dartmouth and decided to become a journalist. That was kind of my passion for my whole life. I wanted, my whole growing up, wanted to be a journalist, wanted to be an editor of a newspaper, edited my grade school newspaper, my high school newspaper, was one of the editors at the Dartmouth, and then got a job at the Oregonian newspaper, really enjoyed it. out of nowhere, the New York Times kind of hired me, thought I was going there to be a reporter. I show up day one and they have me like fetching sandwiches and coffee for editors.
Okay.
Didn't really understand the job description very well, but eventually I got the chance to write probably over like 150 articles for the Times in 2 years there. And then I went to work in Russia for a Russian newspaper. I was a Russian major in college. And wrote for a Russian newspaper called Moscow News, and then returned to the United States, went to law school and business school at Harvard, did JD MBA. It was 4 years, racked up too much student debt and needed to go pay it off somehow. Decided to go into finance because I enjoyed it, studying it in business school, and worked for some investment banks in M&A and focused on media because of my background in journalism. It was an area that really interested me. And that kind of led me to work for a hedge fund like Renae. Eventually, in the late 90s, I started working at a very successful hedge fund in media and telecom, eventually technology, and started my own in 2001 called TCS Capital. Those are my wife's initials. And TCS was a very successful stock picking type of hedge fund, long, short, focused on TMT, technology, media, and telecom. And we had great returns over, 15, 16 years, and decided, I'd say about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to become a family office, which just means I was investing my own capital and not outside capital. And through that experience, I was exposed to Bitcoin. I was always kind of a contrarian investor. I was always interested in things that were underfollowed, and Bitcoin kind of fell into that category. So I was exposed to it pretty early. It was hard to invest in, as a hedge fund. There weren't really a lot of typical, stock opportunities like there are today. And so it was something I followed closely, dabbled in, but wasn't really, orange pilled or anything until probably the last few years. And that's where I am today. Today I still invest a lot. I meet with companies all the time across the stock market, not just in TMT. Very busy on a day-to-day basis, following the stock market and following individual companies in the stock market and running a portfolio with TCS as my the same entity that I've always invested with. And then I'm also extremely involved in Semler Scientific as its chairman and one of its largest shareholders. I decided to take an activist role and get involved at a board level back in April of 24 because I felt the company needed change and I wanted to be a change agent. And we reconfigured the board, and we spent a lot of time, as Renae mentioned, like looking at acquisition ways to grow the business. And that's how we, how we became, how we came around to having a Bitcoin Treasury strategy. It was a process of just very thoroughly scanning the universe for opportunities in medicine, in other areas, even to buy things or to organically create businesses. And it was interesting how it all kind of converged on at this time when Michael Saylor was having so much success with Microstrategy and his strategy there to grow Bitcoin on his balance sheet and encouraging other companies to follow. And it was shocking to me that no one had really followed in his footsteps at that point. And I shared that idea with the board, Bitcoin for Corporations. We had a really good discussion and learning experience coming up to speed on Bitcoin for the whole board, and decided that it would be a really wise thing to do with our balance sheet.
To the extent that you can share, did implementing a Bitcoin Treasury strategy cause you to hire any additional employees or contract with any additional outside vendors? Or were you able to implement the strategy with simply all the relationships that you already had in place?
That's a good question. Renae, why don't you were very involved in that process.
Sure. Yeah. We actually were able to do the execution with the employees that we currently had. It was a lot of blocking and tackling for my team on setting everything up. Obviously, since we're a public company, we have to make sure that our internal controls are adequate. We had to do due diligence on our custodians and our traders. But really, at the end of the day, once you get it set up, it's almost routine. It's like a bank account or a trading account. And so once you get all the internal controls in place and everything set up, then it's just a matter of executing.
But it is a bit more complex, I think, on various levels. There's kind of the intangible complexity of kind of getting your board to kind of be all in. That's not so simple, right?
Yeah.
That takes time. And there's also this communication aspect to the stock market, to people that are interested in what you're doing and trying to communicate it appropriately. And it's a whole different experience from being a public company that reports numbers quarterly and isn't active on social media. We're iconoclastic in that sense. And so there's a learning curve to that as well, especially if you've just been a medical device software business for 20 years. There's a big shift. Your shareholder base turns over, and you kind of have to think about that a lot. That's not something that you anticipate so much. Maybe you do now that other companies are starting to do this, but that's a jolting experience to see pretty much your shareholder base turn over. People who owned our stock were interested in our medical story, and today I would wager that most of our investors are really mostly interested in our Bitcoin Treasury strategy. And the uniqueness of that, and that's a huge change. Obviously, there's things like custody that are really important, and I think it's critical. I'm very hopeful with the new administration that the custody situation will improve a lot. We're really happy with our custodians; they've been great, but I think that it needs to become a much wider, broader group of major banks involved in custodying Bitcoin. I think that's a game changer for this process. And I think also just that this is a risky strategy for most boards, right? We don't view it that way. We're all in. We're super excited. We understand that it requires volatility to generate great returns, and so we're totally subscribed to that philosophy. But I would say most boards aren't. Most boards are going to freak out when when Bitcoin drops a lot, or when their stock drops a lot, or it's just super volatile. I think that's very hard for people to digest, especially if you're an older person sitting on a board. You may be retired, and you're used to investing in much lower volatility things,
right? And
you just want to keep getting that paycheck, that board paycheck. So you don't want to rock the boat too much, and so. All of those things they're almost like psychological obstacles for boards, the fear of volatility, the risk. And so that's really tough. And that's why I believe you haven't seen just a huge wave of companies doing this. And the ones you've seen are relatively small market cap companies where there's boards that are relatively aligned in the sense that they have significant collective ownership in the company, and so it's easier for them to make decisions like this. And they are obviously believers in Bitcoin, and that's relatively new concept for most people. So it's a very psychologically intimidating process for most people. And just to put icing on the cake for you, as soon as we took most of our $60 million of cash on our balance sheet and bought Bitcoin kind of plunged from a TradFi perspective, let's say. It went down. I think I can't remember, Renae, exactly how much it went down. Probably 25%.
Yeah, at least.
So as soon as we finished buying, like almost to the minute, we finished buying Bitcoin, and the next morning there's a headline that there's going to be a Mt. Gox distribution, right? And Bitcoin just started to fall apart, and our stock fell apart, and the honeymoon was over quickly. And so that was kind of a cold shower a little bit. and then on top of that, the Germans, then they started kind of indiscriminately selling Bitcoin, which didn't help. And so this was kind of our first few months on the job as a Bitcoin Treasury Company, kind of experiencing that. And it was a great test. You know, it was a great test of your conviction, what you're doing. And what was beautiful for us as a board and some senior management team is that we didn't flinch. You know, we just kept buying more Bitcoin when we could. And I think that was just a great testament to our conviction in what we're doing.
Is there anything that you would want to add to two things? One, the process of the board being aligned initially, and two, that communication with shareholders at that moment in time, because I know Michael Saylor has talked a bit about him having individual conversations and sending people YouTube videos and then doing the Dutch auction at that initial point of turning over the shareholder base and moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting the way Michael did it in 2020. He pretty much made an announcement and then, you know, gave people the chance to leave, you know, to evacuate, I guess is how it would work, you know. It's a little harder for us to do that, but we tried to really signal to the market that we were, you know, this was a major change in strategy. And we spent time, you know, talking to investors. There weren't that many of them, but who were like, "What are you doing?" But you know, one or two would call us and say, well, "You know, I don't understand why you're doing this." So we try to explain it to them, but there's obviously going to be that friction when that first happens. Again, that's something that's a big decision for a board how to communicate that change in strategy. It really is a big change in strategy, even though you really just, you know, we're still in the medical business. We're super excited about our prospects there, but we also have this other story to tell about, you know, growing Bitcoin on our balance sheet. And so I think with the new administration and more companies doing this and the success that MicroStrategy has, it's getting easier marginally for a board member for a board as a whole to kind of do what we did, but it's still got a ways to go.
Sure. Hey guys, today's episode is brought to you by Stampseed. If you're in cold storage, you know how important it is to protect your seed phrase. That's why I recommend you head over to stampseed.com and check it out for yourself. This seed phrase storage device is one solid piece of titanium. There are no loose pieces, and you can hammer your seed phrase in letter by letter. When you go to stampseed.com, use promo code TIM15 for a 15% discount across the website. That's TIM15. Do you want to speak either generally or specifically to what your overall Bitcoin acquisition strategy is for 2025?
Sure. Yeah. I think what we're looking to do is just to continue what we've been doing, which I think have just been great stewards of adding Bitcoin to our balance sheet and creating great Bitcoin yield, meaning we're just making Bitcoin a bigger part of our story and our financials. And we're really committed to that. We believe strongly in it. Obviously, there are various ways you can do it. We've talked about finding additional ways to do it other than using our ATM or our operating cash flow. We're looking into alternative sources of financing for that, as other companies have done. And that's obviously an evolving, fluid situation, but we're interested in all sorts of ways to raise capital to buy more Bitcoin. We're also just hopeful that we'll be able to continue doing that through operating cash flow. And it's going to be very similar to what you've seen in 2024. We don't give guidance, but we think that we'll just, stay committed to purchasing more Bitcoin and becoming, just having a lot more Bitcoin on our balance sheet. Right now, it's over $200 million of Bitcoin on our balance sheet, which, and since May is a pretty good pace. And we would love to just continue to have that kind of speed of purchase.
I'd like to continue pulling on this thread of like adopting and implementing a Bitcoin treasury strategy, maybe the notion that perhaps it isn't a heavy lift.
I don't know if I said it wasn't a heavy lift, but we
So,
managed it.
And that kind of goes right into in addition to maybe the specifics of how long do you think it took to implement the strategy, operationally? Renae, do you think it's fair to say that on the accounting end with fair value accounting now in January of 2025 that it's maybe less complicated than it's ever been, that you don't have that transition from intangible, indefinite, or how do you think through that?
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, it was easy for us, right? Because we just adopted the accounting pronouncement right away. So we didn't have to go back because we didn't have any Bitcoin prior to then, right? I would say the longest time is getting through the approval process on the custodians as well, because not only do we do due diligence on them, they do it on us, right? There's all sorts of KYC procedures, know your customers. So they have to do a lot of background on us as well.
Got it. What questions do you two receive the most often? Have any of these like investor or analyst questions surprised you or stand out in your mind over the past few quarters?
I think a lot of the questions come just what you had just asked of what is like your strategy? How big could you be? What are the metrics you look at? I would say from our conversations with investors, like Eric said, our shareholder base did turn over, although prior to implementing the strategy, Eric and our board members owned over 30% of the beneficial shares of our company. So, that's a big chunk of the ownership of our company. But a lot of institutional investors have called, and they are interested, or they can't themselves, based on their investment mandate, invest directly in Bitcoin or in ETFs. And so looking at us or Microstrategy, looking at what's the next Microstrategy, can I get somewhere like early on? I missed them in 2020. Where else can I go? So that actually has, for me, been a nice positive in that, getting exposure to a lot of investors that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I'm actually blown away by the support and embracement that we've had from outside shareholders or just people interested in what we're doing. It's been overwhelming. I don't think we ever would have had this if we weren't a Bitcoin business. I think that, we've done a lot of podcasts. We've done a lot of interviews with newspapers of all sorts and media outlets. And some of them have been, negative reaction, and they, calling us MicroStrategy copycats. I find that a compliment, but, there's been some attempts to, to poo-poo what we're doing. But I think that it's just been a phenomenal, amount of support. And I'm surprised we haven't gotten more pushback on it. But, we've had a successful run as a stock, and I feel like, we've created a lot of cash on paper, from doing this. We've made a lot of money and generated a lot of earnings. And we've also, created a lot of great Bitcoin yield numbers. So there's not a lot to criticize at this point. And I think that we love the debate. We want to be questioned. We want to hear what people think. And that's kind of what's different about this too, is that, on social media, there is a lot of debate about companies like ours and what the right thing to do is. And I think that's really valuable. It's like this free marketplace of ideas, and it's really interesting to hear what people think. And it's also really important for us to stay true to our convictions and not necessarily get swayed by what other companies are doing or what other investors think we should do, and just kind of stay true to our cause, which is really, I think, a unique positioning for who we are as a company. I think we have this great opportunity to be a terrific Bitcoin Treasury strategy story, but I still have strong hope that we can be a great medical device and software story. And the beauty of that is that if the medical device and software business can reaccelerate, it only makes our Bitcoin Treasury business so much stronger. And before we had a Bitcoin Treasury strategy, I mentioned we had this device called QuantaFlo for PAD, peripheral artery disease. And when it started to take off, the market responded. Renae, when she worked this hedge fund and other hedge funds and other mutual funds, bought our stock and took it from $1 to $150 a share, pretty, in a few years. And that was just based on one product for PAD. And so we're mindful of that. We're mindful that we really are sitting on some potentially very value enhancing opportunities in medicine, and they're all organic as far as we can tell. There's no plan to buy anything with our cash or our stock outside of Bitcoin. The ideas that we're generating for new revenue streams are all organic, and if they work and they're as profitable as PAD was, then they're just going to be a great feeder into our Bitcoin Treasury strategy. And so my hope is that we're going to have this great dual track story that it really just turbocharges our Bitcoin Treasury strategy.
Do you want to speak a little more specifically to the operating business and what your outlook is and what you're targeting and what your goals are for the year? I know there's pending FDA approval, for example.
Yeah, and we can't say much about what we expect, and the truth is we're still, we're waiting for approval. So right now there's no clear concrete path with our hopefully with our new product related to heart disease. Renae can talk about PAD specifically and what heart disease represents as a TAM, or total addressable market. And there's some other things that we're always looking at in the periphery of peripheral artery disease, no pun intended, that also could be revenue enhancing. So that's kind of what we're focused on for 2025. But Renae, maybe you want to talk about it.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as Eric mentioned, we don't give guidance, but when you're looking at like the PAD business, through the first 9 months of 2024, we had around $45 million in revenues and generated around $17 million in cash flow. So, our margins are very high. It's a software business. This new product extension is actually just going to be a software push. So we've got the units out there already. We'll be able to bundle it or sell it on its own. We actually think it could be more valuable to our customers than the PAD product because heart disease or heart dysfunction is a much more severe disease than PAD. And oftentimes people like with heart failure don't even know they have it until they end up in the hospital with a heart attack. And so it's also very serious. And so from a clinical perspective, we're very excited about that as well. So when we look over time, you can say our PAD business took 5+ years kind of to grow and get really where it was at now. We think that it could be quicker than that because we are starting with our current customers, right? And so we are excited about it.
I think that's an important thing. This new product for heart disease, if it's approved, is we're selling it to the same customer base that we've been selling to for years. So they're familiar with us. They know the device. It's a really cool, simple device to use, and so for them, it would seem that they would be really excited if we did get approval because they seem to really love our PAD product, and so it shouldn't be like a tough sell. It's not something like, well, we got approval, now we got to figure out a way to sell it. It's really just plugging it in to that existing distribution network.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What resources would each of you recommend for certainly public, but also private companies wanting to learn more about Bitcoin and also the public equity Bitcoin Treasury strategy piece of it?
God, there's so many great resources. Your podcast.
Hope.com. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was the Bitcoin Standard, and that book really, what I think is a must read, and especially Chapter 8, I think is a really critical starting point. And when most of my friends who are mostly skeptical of Bitcoin from the investing world, my friends from the investing world are generally hedge fund guys who think Bitcoin isn't a real thing. I always tell them just read the Bitcoin Standard. That's a good place to start. And I think a lot of what Michael Saylor has put out there in MicroStrategy is also extremely valuable to follow. There's just so many great sources. That's why I also love that aspect of Bitcoin, the Bitcoin world, is that there's just this plethora of sources of information and different perspectives. And I think it's also really important to hear the other side. I think it's really good to hear why people don't like Bitcoin or why they don't think it makes sense, and to question, yourself and your convictions. I think it's so important to always test that and not to get too cocky and sure that this is like the be all and end all. I think the quantum computing news, for instance, was something that it was interesting to watch the reaction. A lot of people were like, it's nothing. I think the truth is nobody really knows. I think it's such a complex thing to think about in the future, and it's obviously not coming tomorrow, but it's something that we have to really focus on. And we know that in the history of Bitcoin, there's been a lot of dissension about forks and what direction technology of Bitcoin should go in. And so you have to really be alert and proactive, I think, with something like that, and consider the consequences of it. And I just a big believer in always testing your convictions and always having an open mind and making sure you've covered all your bases.
I guess for each of you, any closing thoughts, and also where can people find you online?
Closing thoughts. Just that I think that, I would love people to, look at Semler Scientific as this company that is going to continually add to its Bitcoin Treasury strategy, is going to try to enhance it and make it, create to maximize shareholder value, and that it's going to be hopefully fueled by the cash resources are not just going to be fueled by financings and by organic cash flow, but also by hopefully re-accelerating medical business, we hope, over time. Can't promise it, but I really think that we have an opportunity to create a great dual track story, and we're going to patiently pursue that. And in terms of reaching me online, I'm on X at Semler Eric. Renae?
Yeah, no, that was a great summary. I would just add, we didn't touch much on it, but obviously there's a new administration coming in, and could be a lot of potential exciting things happen as well. And, as Eric was saying before too, hopefully, the more established banking will get involved. And so I think there's going to be a lot of change, which hopefully is for the positive. You can also find me on LinkedIn or on X as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's great to have you in the studio, and look forward to following you and keeping up to date.
Great.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.